My name is Alex Carter, and if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that people's respect for you often depends less on who you are and more on what you do for a living. Titles, paychecks, appearances, they become shortcuts for judgment, and sometimes the very people you thought were friends reveal exactly how shallow they are the moment those things don't line up with their expectations. I learned that lesson the hard way, one night in the most humiliating way imaginable. Back then, I was 27, working as a waiter in a mid-tier restaurant just outside the city. It wasn't glamorous, not by any means. The uniform was plain black, the shifts were long, and the customers could be brutal on a bad night. But the truth is, I didn't mind. I wasn't ashamed of the work, because to me, it wasn't the end of the road. It was the beginning. Every paycheck I tucked away, every late night I endured, every aching muscle in my feet was just another brick laid in the foundation of a dream I was building quietly, piece by piece. That dream was to own my own restaurant one day. Not just a place to eat, but a place where the atmosphere, the food, and the people all told a story. My parents had run a small diner when I was a kid, and though it closed down years ago, I still remembered the way strangers became regulars and regulars became family. That memory kept me going, even on the worst nights. But on this particular evening, fate had something different in store for me. The dining room was buzzing, the usual mix of chatter, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. I balanced a tray on my shoulder, weaving between tables like I had done 1,000 times before, when I heard the hostess call my name. Alex, table 9. I glanced over, and my breath caught in my chest. Sitting at that table was a group of faces I hadn't seen in years, my old high school friends. There was Brian, who had been the class clown. Jason, who was always captain of something, football, basketball, didn't matter. Melissa, who seemed to thrive on gossip. And Emily, the girl I once thought of as my closest friend. Memories came rushing back, late-night study sessions, pick-up games at the park, afternoons spent dreaming about the future. But the years had changed us, and as I approached their table, I realized just how much. Alex? No way. Brian grinned, leaning back in his chair. Dude, look at you. At first, I thought it was genuine surprise, maybe even happiness to see me. But then Jason smirked, glancing at my apron, and Melissa covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. You're a waiter? Jason asked, drawing out the words like he couldn't believe them. I kept my smile polite, professional. Yeah, welcome to the restaurant. Can I get you started with some drinks? But they weren't interested in the menu. Melissa tilted her head, feigning innocence. So, this is what you've been up to all these years. Serving tables. Her voice carried just enough to draw glances from nearby diners. Emily chimed in, her tone softer but laced with pity. I mean, I always thought you'd be doing something more. You were smart, Alex. Remember how you used to talk about business school? The laughter started then, small at first, just between them. But Brian couldn't resist, leaning forward with a grin that made my stomach turn. Guess we should be nice to him. After all, he's just the waiter tonight. The words hit me harder than I expected. Just the waiter. Like my entire worth, my years of effort, my dreams, could be reduced to that single job title. Their laughter spread, subtle but cruel, and in that moment, I felt smaller than I had in years. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them the truth, that I was saving, planning, working towards something bigger, that this job wasn't who I was, but a step toward who I wanted to be. But looking at their smirking faces, I realized nothing I said would matter. They'd already written their version of my story, and in their eyes, it ended right there at that table. So I did the only thing I could. I swallowed my pride, steadied my voice, and asked again, "Can I get you something to drink?" The rest of the night passed in a blur of humiliation. They ordered carelessly, snapping fingers for my attention, cracking little jokes every time I passed. Hey, don't spill it, waiter. Careful, that's above minimum wage, right? Each jab cut deeper than the last, but I held my composure, because losing it would have only fed their mockery. When they finally left, tossing a tip on the table that was barely enough to cover a cup of coffee, I stood there staring at it. My hands shook with anger, not just at them, but at myself for letting it sting so much. But later that night, when the restaurant was quiet and I was wiping down tables, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to let their laughter define me. I wasn't going to let their small minds determine my value. If anything, their cruelty would be the fire I needed to push harder, to move faster, to prove them all wrong, not by words, but by success. And so I worked, day by day, month by month. I picked up extra shifts, saved every dollar, studied late into the night about restaurant management, suppliers, branding, everything I could get my hands on. My life became a cycle of work and preparation, but I didn't mind, because every step forward was a step away from that night, away from being just a waiter. What I didn't know then was that 2 years later, fate would bring us back together again. Only this time, the setting would be different. The tables would turn, and the ones who laughed the loudest that night would walk into my life again, not as customers, but as desperate job seekers, knocking on the door of the very restaurant I now owned. And when that moment came, I was ready. The night my old friends laughed at me in that restaurant didn't break me. If anything, it sharpened me. I went home after my shift, sat on the edge of my bed in my small one-bedroom apartment, and stared at the ceiling until dawn. My feet ached, my body was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying their voices. Just a waiter. That phrase looped in my head like a cruel chant, louder than the clinking of glasses, louder than the chatter of customers, louder than anything else. But instead of letting it crush me, I made it fuel me. The very next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I had been building for years. Savings, budgets, research, potential locations, names of suppliers, marketing strategies. My dream had always been alive, but now it pulsed with urgency. Their laughter became the push I didn't know I needed. I doubled my shifts. I worked weekends. I took catering jobs on the side, anything that added a few more dollars to the stack. I lived lean, no vacations, no splurges, no wasted hours. Every tip I pocketed, I imagined it as a tile in the kitchen I would one day own, as a chair in the dining room of my future place, as a brick in the wall that would bear my name. But working hard wasn't enough. I needed to work smart. So while my body poured sweat into 12-hour shifts, my nights belonged to learning. I devoured every book on restaurant management, watched lectures online, studied menus from successful chains, and even shadowed chefs who were kind enough to let me stand in the back of their kitchens and observe. I asked questions constantly about food costs, supply chains, customer service, branding, marketing. I wasn't ashamed to admit what I didn't know, because I knew knowledge was the most valuable capital I could earn. One night, while scrubbing dishes after a long shift, I overheard the head chef complaining about a supplier issue, the cost of produce rising, quality dropping. My ears perked up. Later, I asked if I could help look into alternatives. Within a week, I had found a local farm willing to supply fresher ingredients at a better rate. The chef was impressed. The manager took notice. And for the first time, I realized I had more to offer than just balancing trays and smiling politely. That small win gave me confidence. If I could solve problems here, I could do it in my own place one day. 2 years passed in this grind. Working, saving, studying, networking. And then, finally, the opportunity one had been waiting for appeared. It wasn't glamorous. Just an old building downtown, run down and half forgotten, with peeling paint and a for lease sign that had been there so long the letters were fading. But when I stepped inside, I didn't see decay. I saw possibility. I saw warm lighting bouncing off polished wood tables. I saw the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the laughter of families sharing meals. I saw my dream taking shape in those cracked walls and dusty floors. The rent was low because the place had failed before, but I knew failure wasn't in the bricks. It was in the vision. And I had vision. So I took the leap. I signed the papers, emptied my savings, and invested everything I had. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Renovating, painting, hauling furniture, scraping together enough money for the kitchen equipment. I called in every favor, worked 18-hour days, and sometimes fell asleep on the very floor I was trying to fix. But slowly, piece by piece, it came together. I named it the Lantern House. To me, the name meant light, warmth, and welcome, a beacon in the dark. I wanted people to walk through the doors and feel at home, whether they were there for a quick lunch or a celebratory dinner. I wanted it to feel like that diner my parents once owned, where people didn't just come to eat, they came to belong. Opening night, I stood in the kitchen, palms sweating, listening to the buzz of the dining room filling for the first time. Friends from my neighborhood came. Co-workers from the old restaurant came. Even the local food blogger I nervously invited showed up. Plates went out, drinks flowed, and by the end of the night, the room was filled with satisfied chatter. The blogger wrote a glowing review. The locals came back. Word spread. In just a few months, the Lantern House wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Families booked tables weeks in advance. Couples celebrated anniversaries. Young professionals stopped in for happy hours. My staff was proud to work there, and every night, as I walked through the dining room, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride, unshakable pride. I wasn't just a waiter anymore. I was the owner, the boss, the one who signed the paychecks. But even as my dream grew, I didn't forget that night. I didn't forget the laughter. I didn't forget their faces. And then, as if fate itself had been waiting for the right moment, the past came knocking. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, one of those slow days where the lunch rush fades quickly and the evening hasn't yet picked up. I was in my office, going over invoices, when my manager poked her head in. "Alex, there are a few walk-ins here asking to speak with you. Said they're interested in positions." I raised a brow. "Do we have their resumes?" She hesitated, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "Not yet, but I think you'll want to see this yourself." Curious, I followed her out to the front. And there they were: Brian, Jason, Melissa, and Emily. My old friends, the ones who had laughed at me, humiliated me, reduced me to just a waiter, now stood in the entryway of my restaurant, resumes clutched in hand, eyes darting nervously around the polished space. I froze, just for a moment, taking in the scene. The irony was almost too much. 2 years ago, I was the one serving them, invisible in their eyes. Now, they were standing in my house, seeking my approval. They hadn't seen me yet. They were busy whispering among themselves, no doubt rehearsing what to say, how to sell themselves. And in that moment, I realized fate had set the stage for me. This was my chance. Not for petty words, not for cheap payback, but for something deeper, to let them feel the weight of their own arrogance. I stepped forward, the sound of my shoes on the hardwood floor drawing their attention. Their heads turned, and when they saw me, their faces drained of color. "Alex." Emily's voice was barely a whisper, but I didn't answer yet. I simply smiled, calm, collected, the way they had never expected me to be. Because the game had changed. And this time, I wasn't the one carrying the tray. When Emily spoke my name in that hushed, uncertain tone, I could see the others stiffen. Brian's shoulders squared like he was trying to regain control. Jason gave a half-hearted grin that didn't reach his eyes. And Melissa, well, Melissa looked like she wished the floor would swallow her whole. I just stood there for a moment, letting the silence hang, letting them sit in the discomfort they had earned. Finally, I broke it with a calm, even voice. "Yes," I said, my eyes moving from one to the other. "It's me. Welcome to the Lantern House." Their gazes flickered to the polished floors, the warm lighting, the steady hum of customers finishing late lunches. They knew instantly whose name was on the lease, whose vision had created this place. They knew the truth before I even said it. I gestured toward a table near the window. "Why don't we sit down? You came here for something, didn't you?" They followed me like a procession of school children, hesitant, uneasy, but too far in to turn back. Once we were seated, I folded my hands on the table and waited. Brian cleared his throat first. "Look, Alex, I know this must be strange, but we heard you were hiring. And, well, the truth is, things haven't exactly been going well for us lately." I didn't speak. I let him continue, his voice cracking under the weight of his own pride. Jason leaned in, eager to fill the silence. "Yeah, man, the market's tough, you know? Companies downsizing left and right. We figured maybe we could, join your team, just until things turn around." Melissa, who had once led the laughter that night in the restaurant, finally found her voice. "You've done really well for yourself, Alex. We're proud of you. Honestly, we could use someone like you as a leader." Her words tasted false, like she had forced them past clenched teeth. And then Emily, the only one who had called my name softly instead of trying to control the moment, looked directly at me. "We were wrong that night. About you. About everything. You don't know how many times I've replayed it in my head, wishing I hadn't laughed." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. For a moment, I saw the girl she once was, kinder, gentler, before the others hardened her. But apologies, however genuine, don't erase scars." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes steady on theirs. "Do you remember that night?" I asked. Brian shifted uncomfortably. Alex, do you remember? I repeated, sharper this time. They nodded, reluctantly, the memory burning behind their eyes. You laughed at me, I said, not because I made a mistake, not because I was clumsy, but because of who I was, because I was working, because in your eyes, I was beneath you, just a waiter. No one spoke. Their shame was palpable, heavy in the air between us. But let me tell you something. I continued, my voice firm, rising like a tide. Being a waiter taught me more about people than any corner office ever could. It taught me resilience. It taught me humility. And it taught me how to rise when others tried to step on me. You thought that night was the end of me. You were wrong. It was the beginning. I stood, slowly, deliberately, towering over the table where they now looked small, diminished. You came here asking for jobs. My jobs. In my house. The irony isn't lost on me. I let that sink in, their eyes darting anywhere but at mine. Finally, I said, here's what I'll do. I'll interview you. But you won't interview with the Alex you remember. You'll interview with the man you mocked. And I will decide if the people who once laughed at me are worthy of serving in my restaurant. Their faces tightened, but none of them left. Pride alone might have kept them seated, or perhaps desperation. Either way, they had chosen to play this game on my turf. One by one, I spoke to them. Brian went first. His resume was thin, his words even thinner. He tried to puff himself up, talking about management experience. But the truth was obvious. He had burned through jobs, cut corners, left behind a trail of failed promises. Tell me, Brian, I said finally, leaning forward. If one of my customers spilled wine on their shirt during dinner, what would you do? He stammered, caught off guard. I guess I'd get someone else to clean it up. I nodded slowly. Right. Always someone else. Jason followed. He spoke fast, selling himself like a used car salesman, his smile too rehearsed. But when I pressed him on specifics, inventory control, customer disputes, food safety, he faltered. His charm evaporated under the weight of real questions. Melissa was next. She came armed with false compliments and exaggerated skills, but the cracks showed quickly. When I asked why she had left her last job, her voice wavered. I just didn't fit in with the culture. Translation, she burned bridges. And then there was Emily. Her interview wasn't flashy, wasn't perfect, but it was honest. She admitted her mistakes, admitted she was struggling, admitted she wanted to learn. For the first time in years, I believed her. When it was done, I sat back, letting the silence return. They looked at me with a mix of hope and dread. Finally, I spoke. Brian, Jason, Melissa, I wouldn't hire you to sweep the floors here. Not because you're unqualified, though you are, but because you lack the one thing this place was built on, respect. You laughed at me when I was down. Now, you're down, and you expect me to lift you up? No, life doesn't work that way. Their faces fell, shame turning to bitterness, but I didn't waver. Then I turned to Emily. You, I said softer. You admitted the truth. You were cruel once, yes, but you didn't hide from it. For that reason, I'll give you a chance. A small one. Entry level. If you want it, it's yours. But understand this, you'll earn everything here. Nothing will be handed to you. Her eyes widened, tears brimming. She nodded quickly. I'll take it. Thank you, Alex. I won't waste it. I stood, signaling the end. This meeting is over. The rest of you can find your own way out. Brian muttered something under his breath. Jason cursed quietly, and Melissa stormed off. But Emily stayed behind, shoulders square, determination in her eyes. As they left, I felt no guilt, no regret. Revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. About making them see what they had never seen before. The value of dignity, of hard work, of respect. That night, as I walked through the dining room of the Lantern House, I felt lighter than I had in years. Customers smiled, glasses clinked, laughter filled the air. Not cruel laughter, not mocking laughter, but the kind born from joy. And I realized something. My revenge wasn't just in turning them away. My revenge was in this very moment. In proving them wrong by becoming everything they said I couldn't. I wasn't just a waiter. I was an owner, a leader, a man who had built something from nothing. And as the lights of the Lantern House glowed warmly against the night, I knew one thing for certain. They would never laugh at me again.